welcome guys. Today celebrating or commemorating the youth of 1976, which fought for equal education. This year, Youth Day is celebrated virtually under the theme, Youth Power, Growing South Africa Together in a Period of COVID-19. The day is used to remember the uprising that resulted, in deaths of a lot of people, and is also used to reflect on how far the country has come in addressing issues affecting the youth. 44 years later, young people are facing many challenges in today's climate. It's the COVID-19, unemployment, unequal access to economic opportunities, interrupted schooling, and high levels of gender-based violence and femicide. SABC Digital News is joined by Tholoana Ncheke, a media law expert currently working at the National Association of Broadcasters, Songo Didiza, a Green Economist, founder and CEO of GreenBDG, Khaya Sithole Accountant, Analyst and academic, and Tumi Sole Corporate lawyer and social activist. For today's discussion on Youth Day in 2020. Welcome, guys. I welcome you all to this platform. And I would firstly like to have your views on this year's theme for Youth Day. We'll start with you, Tholoana.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to the panel discussion. I think it's very apt that we've actually shaped the discussion this year, looking at exactly COVID-19 and the impact that it certainly had, socioeconomic impact, and what does that mean in terms of some of the challenges that we are facing as the youth. We've unfortunately seen unemployment rate actually increase during this period. We've unfortunately seen issues around gender-based violence as well. And it's really also highlighted the inequalities that we live in, whilst we have been talking quite positively about the fourth industrial revolution and the benefits of having an increasingly connected society. Unfortunately, we still don't have access to affordable data. And we've seen how some children, depending on where they are based, they've been able to seamlessly continue with their education, whilst others have not. And yet we all have the constitutional right of access to quality education. And so it's time that we reflect on some of the issues that have been longstanding in our societies that have been propelled once again into the spotlight by COVID-19, and highlight the urgency with which they have to be responded to. I'm sure a lot of people agree that the issues that we are discussing now, none of them are new issues. The issue of access to affordable data and increased connection and communication facilities and networks, that is not a new discussion. The issue of unemployment, it's certainly not a new discussion. The issue of gender-based violence, we've continuously even had various social media platforms being used to highlight this issue. It is a national emergency, and unfortunately, it is not a new problem, and it's not a new discussion. So it's time that we see how do we actually launch forward and take our country and begin to shape those particular issues from a policy and regulatory point of view, and ensuring that government, civil society, whether we're talking about corporate South Africa, how do we all now shape South Africa going forward, addressing those fundamental issues that have been longstanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Tumi?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I think Tholoana really has just either summarized it for all of us, right? And I think most of us on this call would agree with her. I think, it's really what COVID has done, has presented and really brought to spotlight the inequalities, as she has said. But more importantly, it has also said, in my view, question the type of leadership that we have, and has also said, what do we do as the youth insofar as challenging the status quo? Are we really going to continue with this type of leadership that we have with the next year's election coming? Are we still going to hear similar messaging, or is it time for us to do our part and start shaping the conversation, start making changes for ourselves as the youth? So it is framed accordingly because it talks to collaboration, it talks to us coming together and finding solutions, but it really also says the leaders that we have, is it something that we want to take into the future in the 10 to 15 years, and what are we doing right now to have that conversation?
Awesome, thank you. Songo?
Hi, and thank you, and hello to all my panelists, and happy Youth Day to everybody. I think for me, there's a couple of things that resonated with what the president said. The first one was around innovation. And I believe one cannot waste a good crisis. I believe that COVID-19 is a good crisis for us to really, really, really look at how we can, as entrepreneurs, as young up and coming individuals, to really look at how can we then look at the opportunities that are coming with this crisis. We're looking at this platform now. Zoom is a good example. Was looking up in the news the other time, and this platform is currently estimated at about $200 billion. And as entrepreneurs in Africa, can we not walk away from the situation and say, why are we not creating our own Zoom platform after this? So as an entrepreneur in the space, I'm quite excited about the challenges that we've been faced with, and I'm looking to convert this into an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Khaya?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to everyone on the call. So I think, the question of the appropriateness of the topic, particularly in the moment that we're in, it is obviously quite keen for us to be able to acknowledge the fact that the world as we know it is going to be very different going forward. And of course, what we also need to be able to figure out is what will be the position of young people in South Africa in that new world, whatever that new world looks like. That being said, I'm still the type of person that always wants to avoid being blown away by mass hysteria. So what I'm referring to here is that we should not now suddenly take the view that essentially the conversations we're having are COVID-19 conversations, when the relationship between the young people and the state and the relationship between young people and society is something that has pre-existed before this crisis. And the question is, what have we been doing before this crisis to deal with the issue relating to young people? And more importantly, what are we learning about this particular crisis that gets us to do things better? The problem, of course, is that if we then look at a retrospective, history of what we've done, we probably haven't paid justice to the youth agenda in South Africa over the past few years. There isn't a single cohesive national understanding of what the youth problem is in South Africa and how the youth problem is being addressed. So for a lot of people, they might say youth unemployment is a single greatest challenge of our time, but is that on its own the challenge, or is that perhaps the manifestation of multiple intersections of things that we are not doing right? So we have to be able to unpack what it is that needs to be created in a manner of dealing with it from the grassroots level, rather than us looking at perhaps the end of the spectrum and saying that this is the one problem we're able to quantify and analyze properly, so therefore it must be the problem. That's not necessarily always going to be the case. So I'm always very anxious and very skeptical about us being swept away by the hysteria of the day and thinking that there's a COVID-19 problem, while there was actually a young people's problem in South Africa long before the COVID-19 crisis. What the crisis has done is that it has amplified the youth problem. So of course, the people that are more likely to lose their jobs more than anyone else are going to be young people. It's the young people's businesses that are likely not to survive the crisis. So it amplified rather than introduced the youth conundrum in the South African context.
Thank you, Khaya. With what you just said also, that it's a grassroots level problem, and we are seeing that the president has been having some engagements with the youth, virtually and all that, engaging. This is something that can, and looking at the serious issues that the youth are facing and what kind of solutions can come about from that.
Yeah. So I think for me, there's always been perhaps a need for us to be able to understand that young people in South Africa are actually a subset of society itself. So young people do not exist in parallel to every other South African. Young people exist as a member of a community, a member of a family, a member of a corporate structure, a member of an institution. So of course, it would be very easy for us to be dealing with young people's issues if we had an understanding of what the social issues that underpin the youth agenda tend to be. So of course, if we then want to try and formulate solutions, we need to be able to understand first and foremost this type of situation that we're dealing with now. Whatever the issue is on the day, is that an issue that is unique to young people, or is that an issue that simply has a much more acute or a much more prevalent impact on young people, but still remains a fundamental social issue? Because if we have an understanding of what it is that we're really trying to tackle, it becomes easy for us to be able to say, as part of the national social cohesion agenda, for example, as part of fixing society at large, this is what we're going to do. And if we do that right, or we do that thoroughly, then of course young people being the byproduct of the society that we're fixing will themselves benefit. So we shouldn't take the view that young people exist in a parallel society in South Africa. They are part of society at large. So there are going to be issues that when we fix them thoroughly, when we fix them comprehensively, then it will translate to the young person in South Africa being able to emerge in a society that they regard as far more equitable, a society that gives them an equal and a fair access to opportunity for them to be able to progress, whether it's through the economic ladder or the social mobility ladder. So we should be able to be very, very clear about what we think the big issue is. And if we do things right from the grassroots level, if we do the most pervasive things in the best way possible, then of course young people will stand to benefit on the basis that society at large is gravitating towards a more just and equitable African.
Thank you, Khaya. With that, the president mentioned one of the social ills that the youth is facing is what society is actually facing, the entire society. Like you said, you can't just pinpoint and just single them out, the youth. And I'd like to pose this to everyone. The president has said that the young men must actually stand up and take a stand and fight against the the gender-based violence and the femicide. So my question is it enough for young men to just stand and march or speak out? Is there more that can be done? And should the responsibility be with the young men? Khaya, you can start and everyone else can answer this one.
Oh, wow. For me. Yeah, so that's a very, very delicate topic. And I think the key issue here is that when it comes to the issues around gender-based violence in particular, it is really, really a massive problem for society, a massive problem for the country. And what we are missing is really this one initiative. What is the one set of things that we want to do in order to be able to drastically reduce the case of incidents in the first gender-based violence in particular, it is really that triggers these issues within society at large, and what we need to do in order to enable the system itself to be more responsive to the issues when they emerge rather than when they get reported. So I think for me, when the president maybe says, young men must take responsibility, young people must take responsibility, I would also go and say, let us ensure that what we're able to control immediately, which is essentially the efficiency, they must take responsibility. Yeah. We're able to control immediately, which is essentially. Am I still on?
You are. Sorry, I don't know if it's the network. You are on. Can you guys hear him?
I'm struggling, so
I'm also
just
struggling.
picking up trips and traps
Yeah.
from what he said.
Here and there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Khaya. You have to.
Sounds like Twitter.
Okay.
So I think there are things that are within our immediate control, and particularly how the justice system responds to when people say, I've got an issue at home, I've got a domestic violence incident. And I think we see too many instances of people saying they must take responsibility, and also go and say, let us be hostile. The efficiency. Okay. Actually, there is one variable of this particular conversation that you are in full control of. Tell us exactly what it is that you've done in order to address those. How are we in 2020 still hearing people saying that, well, actually, I went to report an incident and this is what the policeman or the policewoman said. I wasn't taken seriously. It was not a secure environment. I was in the middle of a room with 20 other people, and it was, of course, a very vulnerable and a very emotional time for me. We can't have people reporting those incidences in 2020 because this is something that doesn't require us to sit down and craft an agenda. It's something that simply says in every single police station, these matters are to be handled, how these matters are going to be investigated, and the sense of urgency must be amplified. So the president has a couple of things that he's in full control of. The question of us and everyone else to become part of a bigger social movement, that is something that unfortunately takes a bit more time than what the government is in a position to immediately intervene in. Some people have even raised the question of, if you had a sexual offences register, would that not at least make society aware of who the possible red flags might be within the community? Of course, there are ups and downs to that, in that at the end, we do have a justice system that tends to be rehabilitative in nature rather than punitive. So, of course, if somebody has served a sentence, then the question is, if you keep hanging this cloud or red flag over them permanently, well, are you actually still complying with the concept of a rehabilitative justice? So these are the type of questions that we should be deliberating on. Should we then somehow imagine a different way of dealing with particular incidences of sexual violence so that we do see a change in the trends? But for us to go through one talk shop to another, and for us to be saying that next person must take a stand, that next person must take a stand, it's clearly not working. We need the people that have the power to exercise it immediately.
Thank you, Khaya. Tumi?
Yeah, I think Khaya has said a mouthful, right? And there's an opportunity now and not later to say, what do we have that is existing and we can implement as soon as possible? During the 2010 World Cup, we had specialized courts, right, that were open really for violation of someone who's selling fake merchandise or something like that and stuff like that. We do have sexual offences court, for example, that are still in existence. I do not see why we cannot be having that as a program and something that is continuing and it's in our face, as an example, right? If we are talking about prosecutors that either don't have education, the question for me is, what are we doing in conjunction with UNISA, for example, that has a policing course, or universities that can at least bridge that gap? If the gap is we do not know what the law is, we do not know how to take a statement and stuff, to capacitate, to educate, and make sure that these ills that we see on social media, because remember also, social media is just a fraction of what is happening. You can just imagine with people who are not on social media, who are not able to treat and raise awareness. And if you are horrified with the stories on social media, it tells you that the situation is terrible on the ground. So I agree with Khaya. Let's rather look at what we have now. How can we implement it ultimately? And as the youth, for example, we need to be in the forefront of that. Men in particular, we need to really also take up space in these type of discussions, come up with solutions and not be on the sidelines and not do our part. So there are immediate things that can be done, and it's incumbent on all of us. And I agree that this, talking and coming up with an agenda, what happened to some of the promises that were made not so long ago relating to GBV? How many of those have been achieved? So we can't always invent the wheel. It's about time that we start acting and implementing.
Thank you, Tumi. So, Khaya saying that people in power need to say something. To me, saying that the men need to be in the forefront of this. What about the women? Do you think it's just, let's just leave it to the young men? Let's just leave it to the people in power? What about the women?
Can I leave it to the men alone? I don't believe we can leave it to the men alone. There's a famous saying that says, "What Tinta Bafaz or Tinta Mpokoto," and it rings true, but also Mpokotos can die if you are killing us. But also, once again, I really want to also, I touched on this previously in my opening, to add to what Tumi was saying as well. is there ways that in which we can also look towards technology to help enforce our security systems, the court systems? Let's think outside the box. Let's really think outside the box. And how do we also then collaborate as men and as women in taking care of the solution? So an example would be, is there an app, for instance, that some young innovator can come up with that can help in, let's say, outlining sex offenders, for instance, in a certain town? So there's really ways that in which we can really tackle the solution. But for me, I say we need to now think outside the box and take care of this problem.
And I think what we also have to appreciate is there's the institutional aspect of the discussion in terms of what do we have adequate courts, do we have capacitated law enforcement officials? That's one side of the discussion. But what the more difficult side is understanding the psychological makeup that we have as a nation when it comes to issues of GBV. And I think that's what makes it particularly difficult, not only for South Africa, but globally to be able to address it, because that means that whether you are in power, if you commit such an offense, it's exactly that. You cannot hide behind your power. You cannot hide behind culture. And at times it becomes very difficult to tackle this head on, because then what does it mean for some of the cultural practices that we grew up with? What does it mean about something like GreenBDG, that a certain community or society can identify in a very positive way, and yet we would then want that to be identified as a form of violence against women, gender-based violence, and how do we then start dealing with the psychological challenges that we have? It also means that in our private spaces, you have to call out your friend. So yes, you can be marching, but if you know that your friend is actually perpetuating such against their partner or against somebody else, or speaks in a very vulgar manner about women because of the perception that they have about a particular individual, do we call such acts out? And I think that, outside of the spotlight, outside of the hashtags that we have on social media, it means that it's incumbent on each and every one of us to introspect and engage honestly, even if it means owning up to one being an abuser, even if it means pointing out that your best friend is an abuser. It really starts at that grassroots level where we will not give it any private space whatsoever, because a lot of times, like both Tumi and Khaya said, a lot of the statistics that we have right now are based on what's been reported. But what about those unreported cases that are shrouded in, you need to maintain the integrity of the family, and so we are not going to oust the uncle, the brother. It's those type of cases and those type of issues that we really need to respond to. And that is where you have to work collaboratively with NGOs and civil societies. You have to work collaboratively with the media, where we have to start seeing women not being stereotyped. We need to start seeing issues of gender-based violence being part of subplots, and where we see that the perpetrator at the end actually does not get away with it, where we see that society shuns this kind of behavior, so that we do not give it a breeding ground, we do not give it any space whatsoever. And of course, then there's the very important discussion of also ensuring that our law enforcement officials are not only capacitated from what the law says, but they're psychologically sensitive enough to deal with these cases. When a woman comes and reports such an issue, when a woman comes and calls and asks for assistance because she's being beaten up at her house, it is not the role of police to try and reconcile the couple there and then, so that the woman can stay at the house and not actually, arrest the perpetrator. It is those fundamental issues that we really need to start saying, how do we, even as we induct law enforcement, even as we induct new police, even as we induct new prosecutors, this has got to be a standing issue that is addressed and is part of the curriculum. And if it means that we need to capacitate them, so be it. Songo spoke about how do we take advantage of communication platforms. There are apps, but how do we also teach them to take cyber security evidence or evidence in that particular form? How do they start acknowledging that if it's a text where somebody somebody promises to beat you up if you don't come back? How do they begin to actually accept and acknowledge that that is evidence of a commission of a crime? And, you know, when they say that there's not enough evidence because perhaps they're not physical scars, but how do we actually acknowledge that even those online communications, even whether it's a tweet, how do we actually start acknowledging that that actually is sufficient evidence, because that will also assist in the increased prosecution of some of these cases.
I'd like to ask something though. Do you think that as a society we are angry enough? Do you think as policymakers we are angry enough? Do you think as law enforcement we are angry enough to actually say, you know, it's enough is enough? Or is it just something that Khaya mentioned, it's not just like, it shouldn't just be a talk shop where every other day we gather together and we have tea and talk about this is wrong and this is not good, but then there's still people who are like, oh, well, you know, boys will be boys, or there'll be girls who be like, oh, we're just having fun.
Yes.
So are people actually angry enough?
No, I'm sad to say, in my personal opinion, we are not angry enough. I saw a very saddening tweet after the whole Tshegofatso issue. And, you know, somebody said, who will be our George Floyd as women? So many times we've seen, just in this past week alone, there's been new cases that are reported of another woman who's been beaten up, another one who's been stabbed, bodies that have been discovered. And what is it? It is a tweet, we talk about it, and that's it. And unfortunately, we don't see, and perhaps it's something that we need to start doing and calling out law enforcement and saying, where are these cases? Has the perpetrator been arrested? Where is it in the criminal justice system? Because they need to account. They need to account to us. And actually, justice is not only about it actually happening, but it has to be seen to be happening. So we need to have more and more reports, in the same way that we've got daily updates of the increase in the COVID-19 cases, in the increase in the recoveries, in the increase in the death rates, even at a provincial breakdown level of where is it increasing the most at a particular point in time. We need to start seeing the same level of energy being invested when it comes to communicating these particular issues, because perhaps we can trust the justice system more when they account to us about what are these issues, where are these cases actually being taken, where are they being prosecuted, because people can also be confident enough and come out and give out information, because at times people just feel like, well, what's the point? They're going to say there's not enough evidence, unfortunately. And when we begin to call it out, even in my own community, I will call it out, because I will have trust in the justice system. I will have confidence in our police. I will have confidence in the prosecuting authorities. And when I'm not happy, I can take to social media, and as a public and as a society, we can stand up and say, we will not let this go until we see the perpetrators brought to book. So no, we are not angry enough. We really are not.
Thank you, Tholoana. Tumi?
Yeah. No, I think Tholoana, again, you know, re-emphasizes the urgency of what we are faced with. And one really can ask, where are the police, the SANDA, for example, that at the time when we were told about COVID, from a communication perspective, from them being in our face, they were there. We now are dealing with serious issues that have been there, gender-based violence and stuff, you know, insofar as these things happening either at night or otherwise. Surely, if we are pushing the same energy, as Tholoana has correctly referred to, we should be having people either on the areas that are more crime-ridden, the likelihood of parks, you know, highways where some of these bodies are dumped. So is it really the issue of maybe certain things are a priority and some aren't? And it should not be that way. In my view, if we have that particular same energy and the cops and law enforcement being on our face, properly trained, capacitated, knowing what they're doing, because it really starts there, right? Where a victim walks in, lays a complaint, and an official is able to take a statement properly, gather evidence, because that will ultimately lead to a proper and successful prosecution. But if those things are not in sync, and there's no puzzle really that is put together properly, you will find that people are not convicted, for example. People get out because, for example, the investigating officer or someone who took the statement omitted a certain fact, and these are things that we should be looking at and saying, it's time we fix the system, and this is how we can go about doing it. I don't see why, for example, we can't have sort of a checklist. If a victim walks in, we say, do you have this? Is this what it is? It becomes a yes or no. So a filtered type of an approach that whoever, it's been done by the NPA or something, that this is at the very least, if I don't get a conviction on either say murder, at least the competent, aspect of it will be attempted murder, as an example. But this would be based on this filtered approach of questions, helping victims to come together to be able to know what is happening. And I think those things can happen, and it's about time that they do happen.
Thank you, Tumi.
Can I quickly add to that? I'm so sorry.
Sure.
But I think we then also have to say, over and above ensuring that we capacitate law enforcement, what do we do to provide a safe environment for the victim in the meantime whilst the issue is prosecuted? Because if I do not have a safe haven that I can run to, why would I then have confidence in going to report a crime? Where am I going to go after that? Where am I going to run to? So and there are a lot of these NGOs that provide the support and shelters for women, but we need to actually invest a lot more resources in those to provide those safe havens, because then women will know that there is a full support right throughout the value chain, from even when I report the matter, there's somewhere safe that I can go, that I can be taken care of, that me and my children can actually go and seek solitude, seek refuge up until the time that my matter is eventually heard and prosecuted. So we also have to think about that particular aspect and ensure that we support the victim enough, not only at the police station when they actually report the issue, but if after they've engaged, they communicate to the police station that I don't feel safe enough going home, or I've got nowhere else to go to. Even at the police station, they can actually point you in places within the particular vicinity where the crime has been reported, that this is a particular safe haven that you can go to seek shelter.
And sorry, just this one aspect only on Tholoana's point, then I'll give it to Songo and Khaya. I apologize. Like what we've been doing with building hospitals for COVID-19, having all these things that are suddenly coming up, right? And with the Solidarity Fund sitting with X billions of rands and stuff like that. The fact that it was a need, it was urgent, and we have these things going. Surely we can, through corporate SA and everyone, to say, these are safe homes. This is what's going to happen. It doesn't require, a certain effort or so. Those who were in existence before these safe homes, if they need money to be, at a certain level and being helped, that's where the resources should be directed to, so that safe space is created and is available, and you don't have to start from afresh. The system is able and it can be done.
Thank you, Tumi. I'll take it from here. Now, I think also to bring it back to organizations, right? We cannot, as organization and as organizational leaders, sit in a position where we are financing femicide in the country. Where you have leaders of organizations who are also part of the problem being financed. So for me, I say take the power away from this femicide. One of the ways we can do this as employers, when you're doing your screen checks, your criminal checks and your credit checks before you employ someone, also check if that person's ever been accused of violence, because you don't want to go in now and make the problem even worse. And also, religious community is also going to be challenged to step up to the community, stop protecting the perpetrators. It's really high time now that we do things differently. And we don't finance, we don't endorse, we don't support femicide in any way possible.
Thank you, Songo. Khaya, do you have something to add?
Yes, I hope my network isn't as bad as it was before. I think, what has been put on the table right now, are indeed a range of solutions, and all these solutions obviously have a lot of merit. And I think what really underpins them is the fact that no one can dispute that we're all trying to find a solution. I think the reality to what we hear today, to every day. I mean, yesterday, I think there was a story around a woman was found in a red plastic bag having been killed, and they've been found on the side of the road. And for a lot of people, it's like, oh, that's just another story. It no longer shocks us to the effect. I think, even the loss of one human life ought to shock us. And perhaps as a testimony to just how frequent and just how normalized this real tragedy has become. And I think we need to be able to rediscover our ability to be horrified. A woman was found in, to be outraged about every single case, and then say, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And I think the reality here is perhaps the way the justice system has become. And I think we need to be able to redesign our ability to be shortened how to do it. I think the case of Pastor Omotoso, for example, and Cheryl Zondi is one testimony to just how lethargic the system can be. The case is going on and on and on. It gets restarted and it gets suspended. So for a lot of people that might look to the justice system as their salvation, they look at these various cases and then they're like, well, actually, this isn't what I think that justice will look like at the end. It's not worth my time. It's not worth the effort. And I think this thing of being re-victimized, whether you understand or in the process of having to retell the story, is really, really a difficult process of trying to find exactly what's the way forward that we need to do. So again, it's a matter of we need to figure out what are the few things that we all agree should be done in the most immediate term, and then say this is what we think the consequences or the effects of getting those things right are going to be, and then push the people in power to actually make things happen. Because in the absence of us as citizens actually taking the stand and saying you've been given the right to govern on the basis that we've got particular expectations and our expectations are not being met, we do run the risk of even incidences like this where perhaps the president, if we're lucky enough, might come to the stand, have a conversation. My question is, in 7 days' time, will anyone remember what the president said today? And more importantly, will somebody who's probably being victimized right now as we speak, somebody who's probably facing an incident of gender-based violence today, will that person look back at the system 7 days from now on and say, actually, I can see the difference from where we were 7 days ago versus where I am today? Because in the absence of the people that are at the receiving end of this hostility and this violence, in the absence of them being able to say that we see the system is changing, we see the system being more, open to actually listening to me, it's embracing us, then of course these are indeed talk shops. You might purify them and call them something else, but that's what they are.
Thank you, Khaya. Even with so going forward with what you just said, that there should be a difference that is seen. But another issue that is actually plaguing the youth is unemployment. And last year, the president actually spoke about unemployment on Youth Day, that it's a problem. And this year, it is a problem still. Maybe it's even more exacerbated by COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19 on the employment sector and the education sector. So I want to know, more than just talking about, yes, we should get the youth jobs or anyone else get employed. Is there something else that we should be doing, or the relevant role players should be doing in education, in training, in government, or the youth? Should we be relooking the curriculum, relooking at what jobs actually work in society, and leave everything else that is not working anymore? What should be done?
So I think I have a bit of a different take on that one, in that for me, at this stage, it's not a matter of us relooking the curriculum or us relooking the problem. The reality is that we have volumes of data that have told us time and time again what the issues are. We know exactly what creates an enabling ecosystem for young people to actually get jobs, and that is in itself an economy that is receptive to job creation. South Africa doesn't have such an economy. We do understand that there are very strong correlations between access to higher education, success in higher education, and the ability to get a job. And yet, do we have a country that still makes it very difficult for a lot of people to access higher education? The answer is yes, because in spite of the fact that we might say that at the point of entry, perhaps the fees are no longer the issue, it's the quality of the education that leads you onto that gate of the university that matters more than the question of financing, because it's irrelevant how free I make higher education to be if I know very well that your chances of succeeding in higher education do not exist on the basis that the basic education system that is supposed to prepare you for higher education is itself not adequate. So I wouldn't want to say let us look at anything. Rather, let us interrogate why our politicians, our governance systems are so resistant to actually adapting on the basis of the data and the information that gets provided to them. So if the information tells you that you've got a youth unemployment crisis, and then there's anecdotes all over the world and even in some parts of the country that tells what are the best ways of making things happen, what are the best ways of implementing substantive changes in the short term, the question isn't whether that's been put on the table, it's a question of why it doesn't get implemented. So for me, I really want to move the question to the accountability conundrum to say, there's no point in us commissioning a new case study to explain to us what the problem is. Call your next family member, call your immediate relatives. Everybody will tell you what the South African problems are because we're all affected by them. You know, the whole 6 degrees of separation is very important in South African context, because in the 6 degrees of separation in South Africa, you know somebody who's been a victim of gender-based violence, you know somebody who's unemployed, you know somebody who's probably being affected by drug habit, you know somebody who's been a victim of racism. So 6 degrees of separation in South Africa means that you actually have some interlink, you have some intimate understanding of what the problems are, that are universal South African problems. We do not need to redraft that. We need to ask ourselves the question, what are the people that we vote into power in particular doing about what we keep telling them?
Thank you, Khaya. Songo?
Can I come in?
Okay.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. And I think I'm going to go back to an issue that I raised before. We have to really look at the issue around the cost to communicate, because a lot of the times, even as we listen to the SONA, as we listen to the budget address and addresses from different ministries, there's this excitement about the fourth industrial revolution. There's this excitement and encouragement that we have to be more innovative as a society, and the youth can actually spearhead that actually and lead us into this fourth industrial revolution. But that can only be realized if, one, we address the issues of the cost to communicate. Two, the reality also is that our internet penetration levels do not allow us to have an inclusive approach to this fourth industrial revolution. So we have to ensure that as we are trying to encourage people to be more innovative and make use of technologies to solve socio-economic problems and to create new markets and economies, we actually have to ensure that we all have equitable access to ICTs overall. The coverage that we have, on the one hand, we have discussions around the telcos now wanting to launch and roll out 5th generation networks, and we're on 4th generation networks. But that is only a benefit that is enjoyed by a very small sector of society. And when we are talking about this fourth industrial revolution as one of the means through which we can address issues of youth unemployment, we need to ensure that we take everyone along. We cannot continue to exacerbate the digital divide as we have it. As schools, then the curriculum itself revise the way in which they actually ensure that people can participate and have access to education. We have to ensure that it is not only those that have that can enjoy the benefits of online education. We've got a lot of these online platforms rolling out various programs. We've got Google's making free programs available, but those can only be enjoyed if you have access to data. If you actually even have digital literacy, And that's the other aspect that we need to look at when we're talking about access to ICTs. We're not only talking about actual access to a laptop, but making sure that we can actually all make good use of it, sufficient use of it. And so we have to really look at that as we're talking about the smart cities that our president spoke about in one of his previous sonas. What does that mean for a youth sitting in a particular community with zero to little access to equitable and affordable communication services? And that also needs to be addressed with quite some urgency.
Thank you. So,
no, I absolutely share those sentiments around technology that Tholoana has just mentioned, and perhaps maybe also speak a bit from my own story, which is the green economy. And for me, this is an area I believe that's been untapped, particularly by the youth, and particularly the Black youth in South Africa. I'll give you an example. When I started my business about 4 years ago, I didn't have any startup capital. All I knew was this was an opportunity. I was not going to be a BE participant in a dying industry, but I was going to be part of a new industry, the new markets that have now opened themselves up. And I did not know how to write a business plan. I did not have savings. I did not have startup capital, but I had the vision and I had the drive. And yes, there were some challenges along the way, but and I'm here today. And also just more back on the green economy, just a bit of backtrack. Green economy is really something that we can describe as being a low carbon set of activities across the economy. It's something that cuts across the economy. And for a very long time in our country, there's this big fight between renewable energy and coal-based electricity, whereas really we're moving away from the real opportunity at hand, which is really the green economy as a whole. And I'd really like to invite the youth to this industry. And I would really also like to put the other industry leaders out there to open themselves out to mentorship opportunities, because without mentorship, we can't really access those opportunities. I'll give you an example. The International Finance Corporation released a report earlier this year. It estimated the market opportunities in the green economy at a $24.7 trillion opportunity. And this is particularly in emerging markets like South Africa, across the continent. So it's something that cannot be missed by the youth. Let it not happen to create the opportunities that are in this industry. That's just to share a bit of my story. Yeah.
thank you so much, Tumi.
I think the panelists have really touched on it, and we really, to rehash Khaya's views and to learn, in fact, everyone's opportunities are there, right? And we don't have to, after Youth Day, starting to have an agenda, talking again and stuff like that. The NYDA, for example, is there, right? What is their role in the greater scheme of things to cultivate township Black businesses, as an example? What have they done so far over and above what we've looked at, and how can we take everyone along? We have corporates paying certain levies towards the state, insofar as education programs are concerned and stuff like that. Where do those go to? And how much of that is really spent in capacitating young entrepreneurs, for example, also opening up economies and opportunities in the township? Recently, we've seen also through COVID, where informal traders were effectively arrested for trying to survive, and it just tells you how the system is really so, anti-poor to a certain extent. And how do we then do and take these opportunities and make it work? In my view, as Songo said earlier, you don't want to waste a good crisis. There's an opportunity for saying, this is what we're dealing with. How about we look at these unemployed youth, for example? Let's make sure through the CIPC and everyone where we start registering these businesses while we're still on lockdown. And register, and us helping up, right? Those who are able to and privileged like ourselves, we need to step up and say, let me assist Mam Kubeka, who sits in the auction, Selina Magwinya would fall within an X ratio of, the requirements and threshold. Someone empowering Mamkuela to be able to put together a mini budget so that she's able to apply for funding and these other type of things. So it really will take all of us to address unemployment, to address inequalities, and we really have to leverage from all the skills that we have, and the time is now. And I'm hoping that next year, when we have this discussion or sometime in the future, in the next couple of months, we say, this is what I've done so far to help, and this is what it looks like. One of the things that we recently did as part of Country Duty, for example, was to collaborate with a corporate. They came to us, they said, we have money, what can we do? And we said, well, we are dealing with people losing businesses. We're dealing with people who have rentals and school fees that are owing. Instead of, us going to Alex and maybe, sorry about that, and doing all these things, let's rather start blasting their bills. So if you are owing school fees or nursery fees and it's 5,000 or something like that, here's a corporate who wants, to help you. Send through your bill, let's do that, and let us put that money where it is. And it has changed lives. It's 100,000 that ordinarily any South Africans would not have had, and we at least saw 40 people with their fees and stuff being helped. So corporates also need to think differently and come on board and say, how do we spend our money and do so wisely, but more importantly, in the immediate future, to at least address these, inequalities that we're seeing.
Thank you, Tumi. Tholoana, do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make as we wrap this discussion up?
Thank you. I'm going to speak from a policy regulatory point of view, because that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. And I think one thing that this particular parliament has really done as far as inspiring the youth is, if you look at the youth profile, is we've got a lot more younger people in parliament, and that is the ultimate body that shapes the policies and legislation of South Africa. But what I'd also like to do is actually challenge all of us as youth to participate a lot more in policy and legislative developments discussions, because unfortunately what often happens is we make our views known at the end when the legislation has been passed, when the policy has been adopted, and we start wanting to make input at that stage and saying, but it should have actually been phrased like this, but these are the unintended consequences, so clearly they didn't think these particular dimensions through. And really there is a great opportunity for us to be a lot more active in these policy processes. Make your submissions, or you can go onto the Parliament website and you can always see some of the legislation that's coming. And if it's something that you're particularly keen and interested in, it literally just requires you to type your submission. It's nothing formal, and send it through to Parliament. And I've been a part of a lot of policy and legislative developments. I've seen civil society present before portfolio committees. I've seen them raise issues that has resulted in legislation being taken back to be refined. And I think really this is the time to do so. The Copyright Amendment Bill is something that more recently we've seen, in fact, all sectors coming up and saying, that from the education sector to the publishers, to the creative arts people, to people that just want to make use of online platforms to create content. We've seen a lot of people make input and collaborate and try and shape what South Africa's intellectual property legislation going into the fourth industrial revolution and greater dissemination of online content. We've seen a lot more public discussion. And really my parting shot, as we are talking about life after COVID-19, as we're talking about youth empowerment and youth participation in shaping South Africa, we need to also play a lot more of an active role in shaping the laws and the policies that govern the land.
Thank you. So,
Wow.
you're not ready.
No, thank you, that was very beautiful. I think also it's like, once again, I've said it before, the green industries, get involved, youth, it's there for you. And then obviously, number two, we have to go beyond this online activism and actually really look at acting beyond that. And then the issue of partnerships. Once again, I want to relay my own experience. As a 4-year-old business, there's projects that we've tackled, which major big projects that we've tackled, that we didn't necessarily have the skill set to carry out on. But what we've done is we've gone and partnered up with organizations that are a bit more experienced. And this, once again, is a challenge to those that are entrepreneurially minded to really get started. You start, you make mistakes along the way, you pivot where things are not working, but ultimately you start and you get going. And yeah, let's be awake to those opportunities because they are there. Thank you.
Thank you. Tumi?
Yeah, firstly, thank you for this discussion. And I think it's great, very informative. And I see, with the people who are tuned in and watching and some of the comments that are coming in, it's exactly what is needed. And this is your on your face discussion. It's on your what do I do and what's next. And in my view, it's time that we organize in our respective communities, right? Wherever that you are sitting, how do you then get involved? What does getting involved look like? And I think, to my fellow panelists, we need to then avail ourselves to people who either would want some information because we are bearers of that, through you as SABC, for example, putting those videos out and stuff like that. And then we share to the extent that we can what is necessary. More importantly, refer people to some other organizations that would have this type of information. Because, with that information, it then enables people to really expand and get into other things. So let us continue being there for each other. In my view, we are really each other's keepers, and we can change this if we do our part in whatever way. So thank you for inviting me, and thanks to my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Tumi. Khaya?
Yeah, I think, the important thing is that we cannot, again, really center these conversations around one day, but rather have a structured program of action. Because I think a lot of people, they tend to dial into this platform and see us talking and they see the president talking, have a set of expectations that emerge from this. And of course, it's a question of how we follow up to then say at least some of the things that we discussed, this is how we put them forward, this is how we might even table them to inform policy proposals, as one of my fellow panelists has said. So it becomes important to have continuity in conversation rather than all these once-off interruptions where suddenly, because it's June 16, we must have this conversation, rather than us saying, actually, this is where we are, this is where we're going, and this is why this conversation is warranted. And I always say to people, you must avoid the Oscar problem. Remember, the Oscars have to happen at a particular point in time in every year, even if there isn't a single movie that's worth, celebrating. So we must avoid Youth Day becoming one of those things where we simply say, it's June 16 on the calendar, so therefore there was supposed to be a conversation. No, it should be a question of what are we doing on an ongoing basis and how do we reflect on it.
Thank you, Khaya, for this time out today and being part of this panel discussion. And I agree with you guys in the sense of that there needs to be follow-up and that it shouldn't just be a once-off discussion. There should actually be some action that goes with that discussion from all role players. Khaya said something about pushing the people in power to act. And Songo, you also said that we need to think outside the box when it comes to issues that are facing not just the youth, but society at large. Unemployment, GBV, and this health crisis, this global pandemic, which is the COVID-19. So with that, I'd like to thank you guys for being a part of this important discussion. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in. And with that, thank you and goodbye.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.